Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be diving in to the Aeldari Battleline. Yes, indeed, Pariah Nexus is around the corner, and contrary to what has historically been one of the Eldar's greatest weak points, our troops choices, Battleline, whatever you want to call it, have never really been that strong, but I have to say, in 10th edition, they are looking very solid. And actually, I would go so far as to say that they are definitely within the top 50% when it comes to the strength of their battle line units. Now, of course, as you guys know, this wasn't always the case in 10th edition, but we have seen a couple of buffs to our battle line units, some of which we're already seeing competitive play, but not only that, a couple of units were actually seeing podium placements as well, like the infamous Storm Guardians, of course, that I always talk about on this channel. So, although I know a couple of you guys out there are a little bit worried about Pariah Nexus being so battle line heavy and, really just kind of fearing that Storm Guardians, Guardian Defenders, and Corsairs, and maybe even troops aren't quite good enough to carry your games, and you're a little worried about that, I have to say you have nothing to worry about. Our battle line units are actually some of the best in the game. Obviously not the best. I'm not going to go out there and say that they're the absolute best there is, but they are very good if you know how to use them properly and if you know how to play them to their strengths. Pretty much like any other Eldar unit needs to be played. So in today's video, we're going to be doing a quick overview of the Aeldari Battleline, just a quick kind of review and refresher of the units that comprise that slot. We're also going to be looking at the new mission rules and how they interact with our Battleline units. Of course, not all the new mission rules involve Battleline, but several of them do. And we're going to be looking at how many Battleline units you should include in your army, if any at all. So as far as the Eldar Battleline goes, we have Guardian Defenders, Storm Guardians, Corsair Void Reavers, and lastly, the Troop. Now, you may be wondering why the Troop is included here, and it's because if you take a Troop Master as a Warlord, they actually become Battleline. However, obviously, there are some pros and cons with this. Yes, troops do become Battleline, and they are very good at the cost that they are for eliminating not only other Battleline units, but tougher targets as well. However, because the Troop Master is going to be your Warlord, the Autarch Wayleaper is out. That means, although you can take it still, it's not going to generate those command points for you. And we all know how useful the extra command points, and of course, the lone operative ability of the Autarch Wayleaper is. So, of course, there are some trade-offs here that you need to think about, and I think Quinn players will generally be happy. This is a buff for Quinn players that, played the traditional Quinn army for the entire edition and didn't really branch out into using the Autarch Wayleaper or anything like that. However, I do think GW needs to stop dragging their ass and just give them their own detachment already as well. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about Guardian Defenders. Now, Guardian Defenders are probably the unit you think of first when it comes to Eldar Battleline. They have a pretty standard Eldar stat line, toughness 3, a 4+ save. They have movement 7, strength 3, stuff like that. They are armed with shuriken catapults and a heavy weapon platform, not much else. They don't have special weapons, and for their ability, they generate fate dice when holding objectives. As far as their leader options, they can be joined by Warlocks, Farseers, and Autarchs, plus some special characters like Eldrad, Riel, the Vizarch, and Yvraine. As far as these guys go, basically what you want to do is sit on a back objective, screen the backfield with these guys for a couple of turns in the beginning of the game, and then once your opponent commits their reserves, you want to move them up the battlefield to engage enemy units. They do come with a powerful weapon platform, so that is pretty good, but other than that, they don't do much damage, as their shuriken catapults are pretty standard. However, I will say this, they do trade fairly evenly with other Battleline units from other armies. So that is something to consider if you do plan on using these guys against, your chaff units, your basic Marines, or your Imperial Guardsmen, stuff like that. These guys, point for point, can trade pretty well with them. Storm Guardians are, of course, the counterpart to the Guardian Defenders. They have the same Eldar stat line, but they also have a 5+ invulnerable save with the scale platform. So they don't get that heavy weapon, but they do get a 5+ invul, and it works in combat and at ranged. They are armed with shuriken pistols, guardian close combat weapons, 2 fusion guns, 2 flamers, and 2 power weapons, which seems like an odd mix. But it's actually a really good one within 12 inches, and believe it or not, within 12, Storm Guardians actually outshoot Guardian Defenders. And if you guys are curious about it, just do the math on an average squad of Intercessors or even a squad of Terminators, and you will find the exact same thing. That Storm Guardians actually do more damage than Guardian Defenders within 12. As far as their ability, they do also have a more useful ability than Guardian Defenders with sticky objectives, making it easier to control primary, and of course Eldar kind of struggle with that. Also, just like the Guardian Defenders, Storm Guardians can be joined by Warlocks, Farseers, and Autarchs, plus some special characters, Eldrad, Riel, the Vizark, and Yvraine. The interesting thing with Storm Guardians is that Yvraine, Riel, and of course the Vizark become more, let's say, interesting choices for the unit because they will be engaging other units in combat. Or at least they'll be in a better position to do so. And normally a Storm Guardian unit without an attached character is not one that is good in combat, but if you throw Yvraine in there, you throw the Vizark in there, the unit actually becomes pretty durable and pretty effective in close combat because of those characters. And also because Storm Guardians are going to be advancing up the field early, a lot of the new mission rules are going to benefit the Storm Guardians even more so than they would the Guardian Defenders. As for our next battle line unit, the Corsair Void Reavers, they're very interesting. They do have a standard Eldar stat line without the invul save, and they're armed with a panoply of special and heavy weapons. Now, they can either take power weapons and shuriken pistols or shuriken rifles, and additionally, for every 5 models in the unit, they can be armed with a special weapon and either a shuriken cannon or wraith cannon if the unit has 10. So in a full unit of 10, you can expect 2 special weapons and a heavy weapon. They can reroll hits of 1 against the closest enemy or all hits if the opponent is on an objective, just like Wind Riders. So they do a little bit more damage than our other battle line choices. But point for point, they are more expensive, so just keep that in mind as well. Additionally, they have Scout 7, which makes them invaluable in these types of missions where you have to, obviously get up the board to score on objectives and things like that. And in general, Scout is useful to have because it gives you a little bit of versatility when deploying, and of course, it's basically a mini redeploy. If you don't get the first turn, you can move them to safety. If you do get the first turn, you get a leg up on objectives and board positioning. Lastly, we have the Troop, just in case you want to take a Troop Master as your Warlord. They are faster than the average Eldar at movement 8, and they have a 4+ invul save. They're also armed with Harlequin special weapons, which are essentially strength 4, AP -1, and 3 attack melee weapons. They can also take 2 fusion pistols and 2 Nero Disruptors per 5 models. And fusion pistols are very powerful at a close range, and the Nero Disruptors, while not that great, are better than shuriken pistols on average dice. They also get +1 to wound on charge and confer this to any leader models that join them. So for example, the Troop Master or, maybe even Yvraine and things like that, they confer that +1 to wound. And of course, as far as their leaders go, they can be led by a Troop Master, Shadowseer, Yvraine, and the Vizark. There is a big argument to be made that the Troop Master, Yvraine, and the Vizark are all good leader models for the Harlequin Troop. Just depends how you want to use them. The Shadowseer, however, is probably the least desirable. And really the only reason to take a Shadowseer is if you plan to put them in reserve and specifically rapid ingress them so that they can, of course, advance and charge on the next turn. Alright, so let's go ahead and get into the new mission rules that affect battle line units and talk through a little bit about which units I think are best for each mission. So the first mission rule is called Swift Action. Battle line units can perform an action after advancing or falling back. Now, I really like this because it allows Eldar units that are engaged in combat to still perform actions. So if your opponent engages a unit of battle line to prevent you from doing actions, you could just fall back and still perform that action. It's very useful, helps you from not getting tied up in combat. However, I think the better part of this mission rule is the advancing part, right? Being able to advance quickly up the board with units like Storm Guardians or Corsair Void Reavers. You can even spend a command point to advance 6 with matchless agility, or perhaps even include a Warlock in a Storm Guardian squad for that 6-inch advance. So, of course, this is very useful in the early game for scoring some quick secondaries. Now, however, keep in mind it doesn't allow you to shoot or charge as well if performing the action. So you can't do those things. Don't think this allows you to actually use something like Feigned Retreat to, fall back, perform an action, and then charge and shoot. It unfortunately doesn't allow you to do that. So keep that in mind as well. The next mission rule is called Stalwarts. This allows battle line units to essentially shoot and be engaged or engage in combat while they're performing an action without that action failing. So that's pretty awesome. It's great on bigger units whose shooting or combat is pretty potent. Your Vrain with Quins love this as they can basically still do actions and do everything that they would normally do. Shoot all their pistols, charge in, devastate enemy infantry, etc. But when it really comes down to it, it's pretty decent with every battle line unit. If you have 2 or 3 battle line units in their army, they will enjoy being able to perform an action and still be able to shoot enemy units. It's just good for everything. Basically, it's not a downside for any of your battle line units, and all of your battle line units are going to get use out of it. The next mission rule is called Raise Banners, and this is really good for basically all your battle line units, except maybe troops that are going to be advancing onto objectives early in the game. And this is because at the end of your turn, if you have this mission rule, you get to raise a banner on an objective if there's not already a banner on it, and score 1 secondary victory point. Now, basically, this means that you're not going to be scoring that many victory points from this mission rule, but it is a little bit extra. And because Eldar units are faster, they can get to the objectives quicker, you're going to be in a better position to do this if you get the first turn. The big advantage, of course, goes to units that have scouts. So Corsair Void Reavers being able to scout up and do it on the first turn, if they get the first turn, is a big boon. Overall, though, I don't find this as good as the previous 2 mission rules, but it is still good and it will score you a couple more victory points. That could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The next one that was also revealed as part of the GW reveal for Pariah Nexus was Rapid Escalation. And Rapid Escalation basically allows you to put battle line units in strategic reserve and they can come in on turn 1, as long as they're not within the enemy deployment zone. And basically for every 1,000 points you bring to the battle, you can bring in 100 points worth of battle line units into strategic reserve, which essentially means you can bring in 1 unit per 1,000 points. So 1 unit of Storm Guardians perhaps, or 1 unit of Guardian Defenders can come in turn 1 from strategic reserve, perhaps even a smaller Quinn unit or a smaller unit of Corsair Void Reavers if you're playing at lower points, and 2 units of 5 for bigger point games. Now, truthfully, even though this can be very nice for some early disruption and perhaps an early charge, it's not going to be good for a lot of our battle line units. Corsairs, because they don't have Strands of Fate, would need a 9 to charge on turn 1, and oftentimes they're just not going to get it, meaning they're going to die for nothing. And of course, if you do plan on charging them in turn 1, they're not going to be able to score secondary objectives, use their scout move, and, basically in general, not be able to perform the role that they're best at. Storm Guardians and Guardian Defenders really don't want to do this either because they're actually losing movement by doing it. Guardian Defenders want to stick on a home objective typically in the early rounds of the game and screen your backfield. Storm Guardians want to advance out and sticky more objectives. They're not going to be able to do this from strategic reserve. So in general, even though it sounds cool, I honestly don't think it's going to be that good for our faction in general. Now, I will say this, if you are running a Troop Master as your Warlord, troops that have battle line can be useful at disrupting enemy positions early in the game if you do get the first turn, and maybe getting some early charges off against some key units if your opponent isn't prepared for it. But in general, it's just not going to be, a mission rule that you really want to get. The last mission rule that affects battle line units is, of course, prepared positions. Now, this is extremely powerful. Basically what it does, battle line units can be targeted with Go to Ground and Heroic Intervention for 0 command points. Yes, that's right, guys. Heroic Intervention is now 0 CP for battle line units, and Go to Ground, which is, not something you always want to use, but for 0 CP, why wouldn't you use it, right? Especially if you're out in the open. This is really good for units like Storm Guardians who are going to be out in the open trying to, kind of hold on to an objective to make it sticky on the first turn. And this is also really good with battle line units in the back. But I will say this, it's even better with Quins. If you are running a Quinn army with a Troop Master as your Warlord, having free heroic intervention with all of your Quins, with all of your troops, is absolutely broken. Now, having said that, and obviously this mission rule has immense amounts of power. We all know that whenever you get free stratagems, it's typically going to be powerful. Having said that, I don't really like this mission. And it's because it's so freaking overpowered. Especially if there's characters joined to those units. You have an Autarch or Riel, Yvraine, or a Vizarch attached to some Quins maybe or something like that. That's going to be a mission in which your opponent's going to be really hard-pressed to win. However, on the flip side, for armies like World Eaters or Orcs, this is also a really powerful mission rule that is probably going to be very difficult to overcome. So in general, I just don't like this mission. I think it's way too OP. I think Go to Ground is a perfectly fine, one to have there for ZRCP, but I don't believe that Heroic Intervention, which is a 2 command point stratagem, should be in this mission rule. To me, that's just way too strong, and I think it's probably something that's going to be nerfed down the road. And for competitive play, I just see it as tournament organizers probably won't put it in their lineup for the mission rules that are going to be present in their events games. Okay, so now we're on to the big question, because we've kind of gone over the advantages and what units are good with each mission rule, and, we've kind of gone over the Eldar Battleline and so forth. But how many Battleline units should you have in your army? And of course, I think the general answer to this in Pariah Nexus is that 2 to 3 is probably enough Battleline for an Eldar army to benefit from it if they draw the mission rules that benefit them. Now, if you're going to an event and the event has a lot of mission rules that have, specific things for Battleline units, like, each game has a mission rule that benefits Battleline, I would say definitely go for the 3 option. Having a unit of Storm Guardians and a couple of units of Corsairs, maybe even a unit of Guardian Defenders, can be a very good thing to have in your list if, of course, all your games are giving bonuses to Battleline units. However, do keep in mind if you're just playing more casually or maybe even semi-competitively with your competitive group of friends and you're just drawing the missions at random, I don't think you actually have to have that many Battleline units in your army because only half of the mission rules affect Battleline units. And like we discussed, some of the mission rules are actually not even that good for Battleline, right? Especially for the Eldar. So in general, I wouldn't overload myself on Battleline units. I think 2, maybe 3 is just enough Battleline to where you can be confident that if you do draw a mission rule with Battleline, you will get some effects from it. But if you don't, it's also not going to hurt you. Now, Eldar Battleline are solid, but you definitely don't want to overload on a bunch of Battleline if you don't have to, right? Eldar armies are a machine. We need a lot of different things in our army to make it all work together. If you just fill your army with a bunch of Battleline units, you're not fulfilling other rules. And of course, I don't need to remind you guys that Eldar units are rather expensive. Our Battleline units are fairly priced, but we have some other units that are really good, but they cost a pretty penny. So we need to make sure that when we're building our lists, we're building them with everything in mind and we're not just over-focusing on Battleline. So another question I know I'm going to be asked probably is how our Battleline units stack up to those in other armies? Because we're definitely not the best Battleline faction, but we do have some decent Battleline units. So I would say that all of our Battleline units, believe it or not, trade pretty evenly with other armies' Battleline without considering additional buffs and synergies. And I know that games of 40k don't exist in a vacuum where, your Guardian Defenders are going to be going up against a squad of Intercessors and neither unit is going to have any support. I do realize that. And I know that in general, our army doesn't have a lot of outside support for Battleline units, but we do have some things that can help them. And I will say Guardian Defenders, Storm Guardians, they do more damage than you would think, and they survive a little longer than you would think also. For example, I've had many a game where I've thrown fortune on a squad of Storm Guardians and actually had them live because my opponent underestimated how much they could survive. I've also fortuned a unit of Guardian Defenders that were being shelled by 3 mortar teams by my Imperial Guard opponent. And when turn 3 rolled around, they were still alive and kicking, holding that objective and scoring me primary victory points, despite my opponent's efforts. So yes, the Eldar Battleline can be a little squishy. They can be a little bit underwhelming when it comes to damage, at least compared to other units in our army, but don't underestimate them. For their points, they actually do pretty good damage for the cost, and they actually have a decent amount of survivability for the cost as well. And of course, because we are Eldar players, I think it goes without saying that we do have to be a lot more tactical with our units in general to ensure they achieve their goals before getting destroyed. And yes, your battle line units will probably die within the first couple turns of the game, most likely, but they will achieve their goals while doing it, and they will make the game easier for you to win overall. So in conclusion, the Eldar Battleline is surprisingly good and only suffer from a poor reputation due to years of rules and power neglect in previous editions. Both Guardian Defenders and Storm Guardians in 9th edition were absolute garbage, and they weren't really that great in previous editions either, going so far back as 4th edition. And I remember when the 4th edition Eldar Codex came out in 4th edition, and I had a 3rd edition Codex, and I was so excited because I thought it was an upgrade, only to realize that Guardian Defenders were actually worse, and Storm Guardians were also worse as well. So that was a big shame, obviously, and the Guardians never really got love after that. You know, Dire Avengers were a troop's choice for a long time, what we would consider now as a battle line unit. Wind Riders at one point were also a troop's choice, a battle line unit. But Guardians were always kind of neglected, right? They were just never that good. And I think now that they're literally our only choice for battle line, a lot of players just have kind of been frustrated with that. But they're actually really good this edition. I think GW designed them well, unlike in previous editions. So give them a chance. Don't fear. And last thing I'm going to leave you guys off on, if you are totally against running battle line units, I understand that as well. And the good news here, I think, is that even though there is an emphasis placed on battle line units in Pariah Nexus, you don't have to actually run battle line units. It is not a requirement. And I would say that as long as you have the tools to quickly eliminate enemy battle line units, you really don't have to worry about battle line units of your own. I would suggest running Storm Guardians and things like that, but if you're totally against it, you don't need battle line units to win the game. So that is a plus, right? Eldar are very good at scoring secondary objectives. We do struggle with primary. We're still going to struggle with primary. And if you already have a game plan and you already have a style of playing that's successful to you that doesn't include units of battle line, then I strongly believe that your list and your play style will still be effective in Pariah Nexus in general. And that is because of other things that we've already talked about, right? Secret missions and just the way the mission rules are laid out. I think that Eldar are going to have a better time of it anyway. So yeah, basically there's a lot of advantages to, of course, including and incorporating units of battle line in your army. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. And like I said before, as long as you're able to kill the enemy battle line units to prevent them from benefiting from those rules, then you won't have to worry about it too much. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of battle line units and what your favorite one is. My favorite one, of course, is Storm Guardians, but I didn't have to tell you guys that. Let me know what yours is in the comment section below. I'd absolutely love to hear what you think. Also, I want to thank all my Patrons and supporters for supporting the channel over the last year and a half. Your help has greatly improved the channel and helped it grow significantly. If you do want to become a Patron and help support the channel, I have free trials on that activated, which of course will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategy, tactics, and of course hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description below. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon or some Eldar inspired apparel on the channel store page, I will leave the links for those in the description also. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.